Let's see, dark brown or black shoulder length hair, medium build, dark eyes, mid to late 30s, 5'4" to 5'8" in height, I thought to myself as I filled out the questionnaire. A good sense of humor is a must, and intelligence is unquestionable. I laughed to myself at the pun I had just made. Must be proficient in a second language, preferably Spanish or Japanese, and love children was an important requirement. I looked over my answers to the application form and tweaked a few of them before hitting the submit button. I also wrote a short paragraph about who I was, without naming names, and why I was doing this. I wasn't expecting to see a runway model, not at all. I was looking for a normal woman who was happy with me and my lifestyle, which also included my 2 children. You see, I liked feeling in love and really liked being married, just not to the woman I was married to now. Embarrassed? If you were married to Heather, you wouldn't be. We've been married for 8 years and we're not about to enter our 9th. In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have married her. But heck, we had the same arguments even before we bonded, even though I thought she would eventually grow up and change. To my dismay, she never changed. Even after having 2 children and countless fights, she didn't see anything wrong with what she was doing. Heather would just say she was like that, with a light-hearted tone in her voice, and leave it at that, but not this time. She'd crossed the line too many times, and I'd had enough. We didn't get married after high school or even college. I wanted to go into business. I wanted to have a stable life before settling down. My 2 best friends in the world and I went into business together and spent 6 miserable years building our advertising business. We weren't huge, but we had a good client base and we grew every year. I had met Heather at a friend's party 2 years earlier, when our business was in its 4th year and slowly but surely growing. She was blonde, tall, and very pretty. I'm not a troll, but I also don't have the looks that make women swoon. I think I look a little better than average, and if you didn't like me, well, that's your loss. I remember in college I once asked the hottest girl I'd ever seen to dance. I was a freshman, and 2 of my buddies dared me to ask her out. She turned down 99% of the guys who asked her to dance and was just standing there with her group of friends, looking beautiful, when I approached her. "Do you want to dance?" I asked, knowing full well what she was going to say. She gave me a holy look and said she better not. "Thank God," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "For a moment I thought you were going to say yes, and then I'd have to dance with you. I only asked you to be polite, because an arrogant, self-centered cunt like you probably doesn't dance often with her head shoved so far up her ass, but I decided to ask you anyway. But if you'll excuse me, I still need to take a piss," I said, stepping away from her and her stunned group. A few people started giggling. As you can see, I have no problem calling a spade a spade. I've never done that before, that is, until I met Heather. I guess I didn't notice what she was really like. Getting back to Heather, I will say that for some reason she decided to go out with me when I proposed to her. I didn't know exactly why, but I was happy nonetheless. I was always busy, so we didn't go out much, plus her dance card was often full. She was always friendly when we ran into each other, and after our 5th year, things got better and my thoughts turned to women again. I had a few bucks in my pocket, and for the first time in a long time I could show a woman a better pastime than just going to a movie and a pizza afterwards. "Steve, what's up?" Still burning the midnight oil, greeted Heather, catching up with me at the mall. "There's still work to be done, but we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. How about you? Are you still working at that accounting firm?" "It'll be 4 years next week," she announced proudly. "Do you want to grab a bite to eat and catch up sometime?" "Sure, that would be great. Let me look at my schedule and give you a call," I told her, surprised as hell. "Great, I'll expect a call from you soon," she even smiled widely. "Well, I should get going, I have an appointment with my hairdresser and I don't want to be late." She waved goodbye and was gone in less than 2 minutes. I won't bore you with the details of my subsequent dates and feeble attempts to woo Heather, I'll just say that I tried my best and had some success. Oh, okay, for myself, I was in 7th heaven. We dated sporadically for 6 months when we decided to become exclusive. We did a lot of things physically, but she said she wasn't going to go all the way with me until she was ready. It was the 4th month of our exclusive relationship and I decided to go all out. On Saturday, I took her to a fancy restaurant, took her for a carriage ride around the lake, and finally went to a nice dance club. It wasn't the kind of club where all the teenagers congregate, but a more mature and upscale club. It was crowded, and I couldn't catch a glimpse of the waitress. Why don't I sneak over to the bar and get us something to drink? I'll be right back. I turned around and started making my way through the crowd. It took me all of 10 minutes, but when I got back to our table I noticed she wasn't there. Maybe she went to the ladies' room, I thought as I sat down and waited for her. At 5 feet 8 inches tall and a full head of blonde hair, she wasn't hard to spot, especially on the dance floor. I couldn't believe my eyes and stood up to see better. Yes, it was Heather with some very tall guy. They were dancing to a salsa-style song and she looked hot, but too close to him for my comfort. When the dance ended and the slow song started, I figured she'd go back to the table, but when they pressed up against each other, a slow burning sensation started in my stomach. It had taken me 3 months to get this close to her, and this guy's hands were now all over her back and other places on her body. If the music hadn't stopped, I would have been ready to walk over and stop it myself by now. She walked back to our table with a wide smile on her face. "You're back," she said, picking up her margarita. "It's hot outside." She fanned herself with one hand while she sipped her drink with the other. "I needed this," she said, finally putting the glass down. When another guy came up and asked her to dance, she was about to get up and leave with him when I spoke up. "If you leave me again and dance with him, you can find your own way home tonight." "Steve, it's just a dance." "And I guess we're just on a date?" "Steve, you said yourself you don't like to dance, but you know how much I love to dance," she said as she stood up. "It's just one dance, and I'll be back in 5 minutes." When she took 2 steps away from the table, I stood up. I slammed my glass down, turned, and started to walk away. I heard my name being called, and by the time I reached the door, I knew she was right behind me. I gave the valet my ticket and waited. "Steve, what the hell are you doing?" "Leaving? What does it look like?" "You were just going to leave me here without saying a word?" "Heather, I told you that if you left me again, I would leave, and you still left with that guy." "Steve, it was just a dance. What's the big deal?" "It doesn't seem to make much difference to you," I said as my car pulled up in front of the house. "Steve, wait, I'll get my purse and wrap up." "I have a better idea. Why don't you stay and dance with every Tom, Dick, and Harry? That way you won't have to worry about me being bored while you're on the dance floor." I got in the car. "Don't call me, I'll call you," I shouted through the window to a now pissed off Heather. I pulled away, feeling like Paul Newman in Cool Hand Luke. "We have a failure to communicate here." I remember him saying it out the window before he was shot, and that's exactly what Heather and I had. She never called me or I never called her. I dated others, and while I missed her like hell, I wasn't going to be taken advantage of or disrespected. If she asked me first, I probably wouldn't mind her dancing a couple fast songs with someone else, but never, I repeat, never, a slow song. There was no way in hell I would let anyone get that close to my supposed girlfriend. Sandy and I were having dinner at Tony's. It was our second date when I heard a familiar voice behind me. I didn't even have to turn around to realize who it was. "Good evening, Heather," I said without even looking at her. By then she had already retreated to our table with her man. "How are you?" "It's just great that now I'm no longer with an insecure man." "I'm glad to hear that. But, excuse my manners, Heather, this is Sandy." Sandy is Heather, the girl I used to date. "Steve, we weren't just dating." "Yes, it was, until you let your looks and ego get the best of you. But that's all behind you now, isn't it? Would you like us to meet your man of the night? Unless, of course, you plan on dumping him for someone better later," I said sarcastically. "Fuck you, Steve." "Right, we never got to that point, did we? But I can't say I'm sorry. You've had probably a dozen guys after me, and I'm sure they don't make a thick enough rubber to protect me from what you could have had." I smiled at her. With those words, she turned away and walked away. Her friend rushed off, trying to catch up with her. "What the hell was that?" asked Sandy. "Remind me not to come at you. What the hell did she do? Gang raped a bunch of hell angels? I don't want to talk about it, and besides, it's in the past." "Bullshit." Steve, the way you two are lashing out at each other, anyone can tell that the two of you don't like each other, except you two." After that, the night went downhill. After dinner, she made out on the couch for a while, but Mr. Lucky didn't cooperate. My brain was throwing out millions of data that I had to process. "Steve, when you're done with her, we can try again, or not. I'm not used to playing second fiddle, and I don't like it." She was right, apparently there was something else about her. I muttered something about calling her, but we both knew that wasn't going to happen. I got another kiss and drove my car off to nowhere. The next week and a half was difficult. We were late on 2 projects and 3 more were on the brink. When Ken told me to get my head and ass together, I knew what he meant. I can't get Heather out of my head. "Steve, call her, pour some wine, have lunch and shake the shit out of her and come back tomorrow with a clear head. I need you 100% so we can get the rest of the projects done on time. So if it's not too much of a stretch, can we please get back to work?" Ken and Andy, my other partner, were easy to talk to. They both had fiancés who loved them to death and more than understood that they were working 24/7 to finish a project. Heather, on the other hand, did nothing but swear that she wasn't the center of my or anyone else's universe. But Sandy was right, I still had feelings for her. I didn't call and sent her an email. I asked if she was busy on Saturday and said I wanted to talk. When she replied and asked if it was included in the dinner, I realized she would be there with or without food. I was relieved and so were Ken and Andy when I finished my project and helped them both complete theirs. You see, we were equal partners, and when we drafted the articles of incorporation, we made them very rigid. Thus, neither of us could sell our share without the approval of the other two. In all cases it was the majority that decided. We each had our own specialty. Ken was a terrific salesman and Andy was a phenomenal graphic designer. I could come up with slogans and run the whole project together, including making sure we made money. We were a good team. "Steve, what the hell are we doing here?" asked Heather once we finished ordering. "Just 2 old friends having a nice dinner together, that's all." "Yes, of course." "What about the email? Were you afraid to call? Afraid I'd say no and hurt your little ego again?" With those words, I stood up. "I guess you're right. I was stupid to think you'd changed." I put the napkin back on the table and got up to leave. "You'll always be a self-centered bitch. You'll never think about anyone else but yourself. Sit down, it was a silly joke, for heaven's sake. Can't a girl make a little joke to melt the ice? If it was a joke, it wasn't funny, and before we break the ice, I need to clear something up. Can we at least wait until after dinner while you lay out your terms? I'm more than hungry, and if this gets too crazy, I don't want to miss what should be a great dinner. Why don't we have a few drinks, eat dinner in silence, and then beat the crap out of each other?" This was said with a smile that could melt the coldest heart. "Okay, truce until dessert." "Who said I was going to give you dessert?" "You may get a kiss, but I never said anything about dessert," she said as she took a sip of wine. Turns out, beating the crap out of each other wasn't her intention, and her dessert idea was much better than mine. "Well, isn't this better than yelling and screaming at each other?" she asked as we both lay there, huffing and puffing. If I remember correctly, I heard some shouting a while ago. It wasn't until you stopped what you were doing when I was about to approach. I call it a good tongue whipping, and you didn't seem to complain too much when I did it. "Okay, you can spank me with your tongue anytime you want, just as long as we end up like we just did it together." She rolled over on top of me and ran her tongue over me. Now for the terms. That weekend we resolved most of our differences. We set boundaries for each of us and worked out safe words to say when one or the other crossed the line. More than once I received a call or email from Heather with just one word, chocolate. We both knew what it meant. "I gotta go, guys, I'll see you in the morning." "Steve, where the hell are you going?" "We can finish Carter's plan by 9 if we work together," Ken said to Andy and me. Andy looked exhausted, and I was only running on 4 cylinders. "Heather's expecting me for dinner, and I'd rather see her face than yours any day over a cold slice of pizza," I said as I put on my coat. "Besides, she has a much better body than you, and I'm hoping to get some before I'm too exhausted to pick it up." We were already together and 2 months later she moved in with me. I was still working like a savage, but I decided that I was building a future for the two of us, and it would all be worth it in the end. When I showed Andy and Ken the ring I planned to give Heather, they were horrified. Look, I have nothing against Heather and I know you love her to death, but have you thought about what happens if things don't work out? I threw him a disapproving look. Steve, just hear me out. If you marry her and it doesn't work out, she can have half of what you own, including the business. We've worked too hard for some ex to come along and start making trouble. All I'm saying is talk to our attorney and get his opinion on the matter. And if his opinion pleases you, proceed with our mutual blessing. You guys need to take more walks, you're working too hard. Now that you mention it, what are you going to do about Ann and Linda? Have you discussed a prenup with them yet? They both said that their fiancés were fine with it and that if I didn't believe them, I could ask. Guys, this is so impersonal, and I know it's going to lead to an argument. Steve, wouldn't it be better to tell her everything right now before you ask her? If you do it later, she'll probably think you're hesitating. Get her to agree to it now, then ask her later. That way you'll be protected and the issue won't have to come up again. You'll sleep much better knowing you're covered, Andy said. He was wrong, I slept much worse, especially with Heather's hot body next to me. That was fine. I was a wuss when it came to Heather. With any other girl I dated, I was in control, but at the sight of her, my knees went weak and my brain turned to mush. A week later, after dinner and a lot of rough sex, I brought it up in what I thought was a roundabout way. Honey, can I ask you something? I said, starting our conversation. Sure, baby, anything, she replied, snuggling up to me. Do you trust me? I mean, do you think I would ever do anything to hurt you? No, I hope not. Why do you ask? You haven't done anything stupid, have you? Now she was sitting up and looking at me. No, I wasn't doing anything. I was just thinking about us and our future, that's all. Honey, I think about us every day and how happy I am. You know, I've worked hard to grow my business. I look at it as my nest egg, for our future. You work too hard and your partners don't appreciate all you do for them, she replied, and I felt even harder for asking. We each have our own expertise and we work together to get the job done, that's the way it's always been. But when we formed the company, we put in bylaws that prevent anyone else from owning shares in the company. That way, only the three of us will own the company. What about if one of you wants to leave or if one of you dies? The other two then buy a third party's stake in the company and it stays with the original owners. Steve, what does this have to do with us? Well, I'm just getting to that, I half whispered, watching the sweat roll down my neck and the sides of my face. Would you mind signing a prenup? I hesitantly said, expecting an explosion. So, you're asking me to marry you, right? And you want me to give up my rights to anything and everything, so that when you get fed up with me, you can toss me to the curb like a piece of trash, is that it? Heather rose from the bed, and even in the dim light of the room I could see how red her face had gotten. I had just started counting down from 5 when she exploded. You pathetic piece of shit, who the hell do you think you are? Look honey, let me explain, I tried to say before she shot up, stabbed me, and hung me from the ceiling fan. The last thing I saw was her cute bare ass coming out of the door, which flew off the hinges when she slammed it shut. It wasn't good. She disappeared for 3 days. I tried calling her at work, but she wouldn't return my calls. Thanks guys, I said to my partners after the second day. Heather dumped me because I brought up that damn prenup, and now she won't even talk to me. Is there anything else you want me to tell her? I'm sure you two can think of a few more things to make her even more pissed off at me, if that's possible. Steve, I'm sorry, but how would you feel if she left you and you lost half of what you'd worked so hard to build? I guess I knew they were right, but that didn't make it any easier. When I got home that night, she was already waiting for me. Do I look like some money-hungry bitch to you? Do you really think I'm only with you for your goddamn money? Do you think? She shouted accusingly. Kids, I'm sorry about the other night, and no, I don't think so, it's just, if we were together and it didn't work out, I started before she stopped me again. So you get everything and I get nothing, Is that what you're asking? You can go off and whore yourself out and leave me to my fate if I complain? Heather, I would never cheat on you. Oh, now I get it. You think I'm someone who's going to cheat, that's the thing. At least I'm glad I found out in advance what you really think of me. You really are a miserable worm, aren't you? With those words, she turned her back to me. I was angry now. Okay, Ms. High and Mighty, what would you like to include? I want to protect my business interests and everything I've built up to this point, but if you have anything to suggest, now is the time to speak up. She stopped and turned around. What about you cheating on me? What if in 10 years you want to replace me with a newer, sexier model? What will happen then? Well, we can put something in the agreement that stipulates that, if you're afraid I'll do something like that. I hate it as much as you do, but if it's laid out in black and white, at least we'll know the consequences if either of us decides to go astray. In other words, you don't think it's going to work out? Is that what you're trying to tell me? Heather, that's not what I mean. I love you to death, and we may never need this, but if we do, it will cover us both. So if you cheat on me, I can have anything I want? And the same goes for me if you do. She paused, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. I don't like it, but I understand the reasoning behind it. It's like we're drawing up an impersonal prenup, clause 4, condition 3, and all that. Well, at least one good thing came out of all this, she winked at me. What the hell was that? I asked. At least now I know for sure that you want to marry me, and frowning, she smiled. Steve, I know you'll never try to trick me, at least outside of the bedroom. So if I have to sign some ridiculous prenup to get you forever, then so be it. Let's just get this over with and we can go back to the way things were before you chickened out. I won't chicken out, said I in a serious voice. Never mind, she scoffed. Taking my hand, she led me back to our bedroom. We need to put the last 3 days behind us, and I only know one way to start the healing process. The next day I was late for work. It took a few weeks to work out the exact wording. My business and house were off limits, but anything further was fair game. It came down to the fact that if we decided to split, it would be 60-40, with me getting 60% since I earned the most. However, if one of us cheated, the guilty party would get a maximum of $25,000, and the rest would go to the offending party. The most detailed was what was considered cheating. The definition covered not only the physical act, but also the emotional dishonoring and dishonoring of the other party. I expanded the definition to include the impact it could have on my business. All in all, it was detailed, thorough and, best of all, finalized. We both signed it. After the document was notarized, the attorney kept a copy and put a copy in our safe deposit box, and I hoped it would be forgotten. That night we went out to dinner to celebrate the occasion. It was like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I sat there and just stared at her, thinking about how much I loved her and how close I was to losing her. Satisfied? I asked. Very much, she said, reaching for my hands. You know I love you, don't you? And you know I'm in love with you too? I replied as our eyes made love to each other. Let's skip dinner and go home. Not on your life, cowboy. I'm hungry, and I need a big piece of meat tonight, she said, looking at me. And probably dinner, too. What would you say if I asked you to marry me? You asked me to, don't you remember? I thought it was a done deal now that we'd talked about the prenup. But I never said those words. Okay, Steve, let's hear them. She set down her wine glass and folded her arms. Here? Now. Which could be better? At least I'll have tons of witnesses to the grand event, she giggled nervously. I realized she was just teasing me, knowing I'd never do it in a public place like a crowded restaurant, but this time she was wrong. I'd been carrying that ring around with me for the past month, waiting for the right time to give it to her. I stood up, walked over to her, and lifted her to her feet. Steve, you're embarrassing me, she said, looking around because people were now looking in our direction. I got down on one knee and pulled the ring out of my vest pocket. Heather, I love you more than anything in the world. You make me happy, and I want to live my whole life with you. Will you honor me by becoming my wife? I said it loud enough for everyone around us to hear. There was dead silence in the hall. Everyone was looking at us. She looked at the ring and silently said yes. Yes, you crazy fool, I will marry you, she finally exclaimed aloud. The hall erupted in joyous shouts. The visitors clapped and congratulated us. That night we made love like we had never made love before. Clasping me between her thighs and holding her hands above her head, we kissed forever. She responded to my every move, our lips and tongues never left each other, and in that moment I realized I had found my true soulmate. 4 months later we had a small wedding, and 2 weeks after that I found out she was pregnant with our firstborn. After Gary Michael was born, she quit her job and became a full-time homemaker, and when Casey came along, we were all in, she said. 1 boy, 1 girl, and a house with a white picket fence, we had it all. Once a month we had dinner with my partners and their wives, they were both getting married. Every quarter we threw a party for all of our clients. It wasn't a grand event, just dinner and drinks to thank them for their continued support. I think I started noticing it right after Gary was born, but I never paid much attention, but looking back, I think I should have. When she walked into a room, she wanted all eyes on her. She started dressing provocatively enough to make sure of it. It wasn't as noticeable at first, but then, before Casey's pregnancy, she started to go overboard. After Casey was born, it stopped for a while because she spent an obscene amount of time dressing our daughter in the most revealing things she could find. She was my little angel, but to Heather she was a doll that needed dressing up. It was at our quarterly meeting, just after our 6th anniversary, that we had our first major fight. I was working in the hall with my partners, and Heather was working in the hall for a completely different reason. I don't think she was drunk, maybe only slightly tipsy, however, she was too friendly with several of the men present. She had always loved to dance and was a great dancer, but what she was doing there was more than compulsive. The worst part was that I wasn't the first to notice it, but one of my partner Ann's wife. Steve, is Heather drunk? I don't think so, why do you ask? She just turned me around and pointed to the dance floor. The only way I could describe what she was doing was dry humping her partner right there on the dance floor. The worst part was that I had no idea who the guy was. When the song ended, I was already there. Grabbing her arm, I asked what the hell was she doing? Steve, I'm dancing with the son of your oldest client. He asked me if I wanted to dance and I said yes. What's the problem? The problem is, I don't like it when my wife hooks up with some guy on the dance floor, that's what it's all about. All the young guys now dance just like that, nothing special. This is very important to me, and you are no longer a young child. You're a married woman with 2 children. Steve, I may be a little older and have 2 kids, but I'm not dead yet, she replied. I'm not telling you not to have fun, but when the wife of one of my partners tells me you're making love to some guy on the dance floor, it becomes my business. Think about what my other clients think. They're probably saying what a lucky bastard you are since you have such a hot wife, she tried to say with a smile on her face. Not this group, Heather. They're old assholes who won't say a word, even if they have a mouthful of shit. But know this, they'll take our contract away from us in a heartbeat if they think there's any chance of any infractions affecting their business. Okay, I'll chill out. But you really need to relax. It was a long drive home. We were arguing about how the wife of one of the owners should behave. I told her what I thought and she just rolled her eyes. Things got worse after that. 2 months later, at a charity auction, she showed up in a skirt that I thought was too short. I voiced my displeasure, and Heather said she wasn't going to change. Steve, if you don't like the way I'm dressed, just leave me at home and go on your own. You know I can't do that, they're expecting both of us. I relented and off we went, much to my horror. That night she did not fail to perform in the audience, although I tried to keep her at arm's length. We danced through more than half the songs, and when the slow song came on, she seemed to climb into my jacket. Kids, why don't we trash the place and go home? I'm horny as hell and I can feel you growing during the last dance, she purred in my ear. I'd love to, but just calm down for now. We have to stay for the auction anyway, this is a business dinner, not a pleasure party, I tried to explain to her. Heather, everything was fine until the auction started. We won a few items that I would need for work. We were about to leave when they started auctioning off a date with one of the hot single guys. I let her out of my sight for less than 30 seconds to find out that she and another woman were in the hot bidding for this guy. What the hell are you doing? Have you lost your mind? I shouted quietly through clenched teeth, trying my best to put a smile on my face. Just jacked up the price, she replied. Now think about what you're doing, if that's even possible. My married wife is setting up a date with a single guy. Everyone in the room knows who we are, and you give the impression that I'm either okay with it or you don't care about our marriage. Either way, you've embarrassed the hell out of me. So get your purse, smile sweetly at everyone, because we're out of here before you do any more damage to my reputation, do you understand? You don't have to treat or talk to me like a child. Honey, if I don't, your brain won't understand what I'm saying. It was said with that stupid smile that was still showing on my face. Finally, we made it out of the building. The explosion started in the car, and it was a real explosion. Steve, I'm not an idiot. I have an MBA and an accounting degree, she spat at me. Well, then use your brain once in a while. You know what they say, if you don't use it, you lose it, I hissed back. Keep it up, and I know something you won't be able to take advantage of for a hell of a long time yet. Is that supposed to be some kind of threat? Not a threat, but a promise. Venom burst from her lips. I was angry, she was angry, and neither of us was going to give an inch. Needless to say, I didn't get a kiss or anything else even remotely resembling sex that night, or the next, or even the night after that. I heard your wife almost bought a stallion the other day, Andy said, trying to make a joke. Stuff for the office is one thing, but if she bought one, you'd have to pay that expense out of your own pocket. I could tell from his words that it didn't have the effect he was hoping for. Steve, it was a joke. It's not funny now, and it certainly wasn't funny last night. So if you don't mind, let's drop the subject, okay? No problem, I was just thinking. I stopped him right there. Look, I have to deal with one person who doesn't think before saying or doing something stupid. I don't want to worry about you either. Let's just get to work. Not a great start to a Monday morning. Fortunately, work was busy and I could close the door and go about my business without anyone getting in the way. The atmosphere of the house was chilly at best, and if it weren't for our 2 kids, I probably would have spent a lot less time there. We slept in the same bed, but there was a 10-foot-high barrier between us. God help us if we accidentally made contact. It was like someone had hit us with a red-hot fireplace poker. Are you done sulking yet? Heather asked me after dinner Friday night. If not, I'm out of here, I've had enough frosting since last Saturday night. You still don't get it, do you? Said I, looking at her. And I'm afraid you never will, I stated sadly, and shook my head and walked away. Talk to me, okay? Just don't walk away from me or I'll leave, she tried to threaten me. Okay, suit yourself. I should have put her on a shorter leash. Maybe then I could have controlled her a little more. No, that would never have worked, not with her anyway. I'm leaving, don't wait up. She came out in a short black leather skirt that hid nothing and a white bustier with a slit up to her navel. When you leave, where should I send your things? I turned to her. She gave me a glare and walked out the door. I was going to get drunk to the point of passing out, but I decided not to. My marriage was dying, and not even slowly. She didn't seem to care anymore. Despite being a shitty wife, Heather was a great mother, and that was one of the only reasons I continued to overlook her flippant attitude. She came home just before 1 a.m. I pretended to be asleep. I wasn't in the mood to mess around with her tonight. I heard the shower, the sound of an electric toothbrush, and finally saw the lights go out. She slipped into our bed and instead of staying on her side, she moved next to me. I felt her hot body next to mine and suddenly she started kissing my neck from behind. I know you're awake, do you want to fool around? I want you tonight. I rolled over and just stared at her, not saying a word for a minute. I guess you had to go out and socialize with other guys to want me, or do you want me to know what sloppy seconds feel like? Either way, I lost my mood when you walked out the door tonight. I grabbed a pillow and fell asleep on the couch. Okay, I didn't sleep, I spent the night sitting on the couch. I was tired of the flirting, the dancing, and the fact that she pounced on every guy who paid the slightest bit of attention to her. I was jealous to the point of insanity, but my possessive nature had gone away years ago. She was my wife, no one else's. She had married me, which meant she was mine and I was hers. I didn't trust her anymore, of course. If she acted like this when I was around, I couldn't even imagine how she acted when I wasn't around. The thought was too frightening, and it made me sad to think that I might be starting a new chapter in my life soon. Around 7 o'clock in the morning, I looked up and saw her. She was in her robe, leaning against the doorjamb with her arms crossed in front of her. We need to talk. I didn't do anything with anyone last night. I had a few drinks, danced with a few guys and came home, that's all. I didn't kiss anyone, let anyone fondle me, or go to bed with anyone, you have to believe me. I realized she was begging for help. Why should I believe you? I see how you act with our friends, I can't imagine what you do with strangers. I just don't want to fight about it anymore. You live your life and I'll live mine. We'll meet occasionally at the center, and life will go on. That way I won't have to worry about you embarrassing me anymore. Are you giving up on us? From our marriage? She yelled at me. What marriage? I've felt more like your probation officer than your husband for too long. It's like a father trying to keep his daughter's virginity. He does his best, but in the end it's up to the daughter to decide whether to keep it or give it away. You gave away our marriage. Steve, you're an asshole. I didn't give anything away. It's right not to pay. You've made me pay again and again with my self-respect and the love I once had for you, but no more, I have nothing more to give. Come upstairs and I'll make you feel good like I used to. You still can't hear me, can you? I'm done, it's over. She got angry, said something under her breath, and walked away. I thought I could live together but apart from her for the sake of our children, but I was wrong. She did everything she could to keep me interested in her, and though my body almost betrayed me a couple of times, my mind held firm. I never told her about the Sunday block party, but somehow she found out. I was looking forward to a nice quiet evening with a few old friends. It hadn't been easy the last few times, but tonight I wouldn't have to keep one eye on Heather and the other on the guests. Is your wife coming tonight? Asked Ken as we leaned against the bar. No, I haven't said a word to her about it. Well, I guess there won't be any excitement then, he joked, trying to lighten my mood, but he failed miserably. The party was in full swing, and we were just sitting down to dinner when I caught a glimpse of her. The dress was too low in the front and cut too high on the side. I almost didn't make it, honey, Heather said, kissing my cheek. She sat down in the vacant chair, squeezing both the chair and herself between me and the man to my right. I looked at her, and she really did look amazing in her new dress. It showed off her body and fit her just right. Linda told me about the party, it must have slipped your mind, she looked at me. She whispered quietly, you don't want anyone to think there's trouble in paradise, do you? She smiled at the couple across the table from us. I thought your wife wasn't coming, reminded Andy. You can thank your wife for being here, I told him in disgust. Hey, it's not her fault you can't control your wife. I wanted to strangle him right then and there, and I think he realized it as soon as he opened his mouth. Maybe she'll act normal tonight, trying to make it up to you. Heather worked the room as most of the guys tried their best to look like they weren't looking over her top, but of course they were. When the band started playing, she calmly walked over and asked me to dance. Why are you here? Haven't you done enough? Steve, you have two choices. We can be the loving couple we really are, or I can be the biggest bitch that ever walked the earth, your choice. You're really trashy, aren't you? You think you can blackmail me into loving you again? You don't respect me and you probably never have, but I'm not going to put up with this farce anymore. I stepped away from her. I walked over to Linda first, thanking her for telling Heather about the party, and then to the bartender. He handed me my drink and I slipped him $100 bill and told him what I wanted him to do. He smiled, I didn't, I went back to my seat. Heather was remarkably good that night, she sucked down drinks like water and flirted with every guy, single or not. When she found herself on the dance floor with our client's brother, things took a turn for the worse. She didn't just dance with him on the floor, it was like she ate him up and they made love in front of God and everyone else. Several couples left, already knowing what was going to happen, but apparently not wanting to be around when it all went to shit. David, if your brother doesn't take his hands off my wife right now, he'll be seeing the hospital room from the inside for a long time. Do I make myself clear? He looked at me and realized I wasn't kidding. Phil, we're leaving, and right now, David said to his brother, and they both looked at me. Phil was looking at Heather. He seemed to be thanking her for the dance, and without another word, they both left. That was the end of the party, I'd say on a low note. Ken, Andy, ladies, I'm outta here, I told them. I probably won't be coming into work tomorrow, and probably the day after tomorrow too. Looks like I have some personal business to take care of, I told them. Steve, maybe if you talk to her, Linda said before I interrupted her. If Andy saw you acting like that, what would he do? She didn't have a suitable answer to that question. I approached the bartender and he handed me a branded camera. I gave him another $50 and went home. Home. I have no idea what time Heather got home because I never heard from her. I found her asleep on the living room couch on my way out the door. First I stopped by the bank and emptied our safety deposit box. Then I went to the lawyer and got the sale and our prenup. I told him I wanted to leave and not be gentle. I spent the next couple hours on the computer rearranging things and changing the location of stocks, bonds, and bank accounts. Credit cards were canceled, reopened in my name only, and I went so far as to notify my children's school via email that I was in the process of divorce so she couldn't take my children and run away. I made sure my attorney prepared an order signed by a judge stating that I was to be notified if Heather came to the school to try to take the children. Where have you been all day? I called your work and they said you took the day off, said Heather, watching my reaction to her words. I'm sorry about last night, I guess the anger and alcohol probably made me look like a total ass. I apologized to Ken, Andy, and their wives and was waiting for you to get home so I could talk to you. You don't have to. Like I told you before, I'm done with you. If I wanted to marry a whore, I would have picked a better one than you. At least with a whore I'd know what's what, and with you I never realized anything until last night. I had my suspicions, but I never knew what a conniving bitch you could be. Thank you for finally coming clean. Steve, that's not what you meant. I'm sorry, but we can get through this, I know. I just shook my head. Here's a check for $10,000 for legal advice. You'll be handed it in Thursday, and you'll know that all our old accounts and credit cards are now closed. You can stay in the house, just stay away from me. According to our prenup, we will share custody of the kids, and since I had this house before I met you, they will stay here, at least for now. Let's try to make this as civilized as possible, if not better than our kids. Don't even think you can take them and leave. I have a signed court order that says I must be notified immediately if you try to take the kids out of school for any reason. When you get a lawyer, I will send him a copy of our prenup. I wish I could say this is just business, but it's not, it's personal to me now. So if you'll excuse me, I have to tell our children that we're getting divorced and make it as easy as possible for them. I stepped away from a stunned Heather. She hired a good lawyer, thinking she would get a lot of money from me. When he saw the agreement, the testimonies of people at different parties, and the tape of her speaking at the Sunday night party, he came to her to meet Jesus. She was not happy. The divorce was an easy decision, and since everything was spelled out, it went pretty quickly. I don't know if she hated me to the core, but she must have because my lawyer was tough. Heather ended up in a one-bedroom apartment with her jewelry, clothes, car, and a bunch of change that wouldn't last forever. I let her see the kids in the house, but made sure I was always around. Eventually she found a part-time accounting job and I understand she was freelancing part-time. For the next 3 months I felt quite tolerable. The kids were with me because Heather couldn't afford to support them. She saw them a couple times a week. She was even allowed to visit them on weekends at her apartment. I tried to stay out of her way when she went to pick them up. I didn't have to see her unless I wanted to, and I didn't want to. I didn't go on dates if for no other reason. We were busy and starting to hit our stride. And then I was attacked. No, 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 I'm not putting up with this, I shouted to the two of them. Why the hell would I agree to something like that? You know what she's like. And says she needs the money after your divorce, and this way we won't have to worry about anything or do anything for our meetings. She'll organize everything, send out the invitations, take care of the food and drinks. All we'll have to do is just go there and enjoy ourselves. Come on, it'll be a win-win situation. I objected, but was interrupted. I wasn't going to leave, but it wouldn't have been right from a business standpoint. So I got over it and went. Good evening, Steve. Heather, I nodded, confirming her words. I have everything under control. Enjoy it and pretend I'm not here. Yeah, that's right. I guess I was wrong. It went great, and it was probably the best party we ever threw, that's what our customers told us. We got new business, and Ken and Andy were sure it was because of the party. We should hold them every other month and open them up to potential clients. We can have a meeting room and, they tried to assure me, that way we can get even more business. I was against it, but they changed my mind the second time. I didn't like where this was going. So the parties under Heather's leadership continued and grew in size. She became the hostess and now interacted openly with our guests. She became more than friendly with a few of our clients, and if I didn't know better, I would have sworn there was something going on behind the scenes. When Heather started bringing in women to hand out treats, I shuddered. They looked and acted like high-priced call girls. When one or two started disappearing with customers upstairs, I tried to temper my fervor. Guys, are we running a brothel? You might get a client or two, but our old clients aren't going to stick around and wait for something to happen. They need to think about their reputations. Steve, we have more business than we can handle. Calm down and go with the flow, Ken said to me, looking at one of the girls. You guys can stay here if you want, but I'm out of here. I want no part of this. I was about to leave the room when Heather came up to me. Leaving so early, the party's just getting started. Did you really love me, or was it all one big pretense on your part? I loved you, but you got so damn boring. I was like a wild horse that wanted to run, and you kept trying to keep me in the barn. For your information, I never cheated on you until that night. I guess I thought you were my white knight and would fight for me, but you never did. Really, why on earth would I fight for a man who goes out of his way to act like a tramp and embarrass me? You seem to be giving our clients more than you've given me in the last 6 months of our marriage. When I pay for a prostitute, I expect her to act like a prostitute. I walked away from her with my mouth open and my pride intact. After that night, I stopped going to our company parties. Mr. Collins, I said, getting up from the table and pulling out a chair for him. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. Steve, I never like to wait around giving someone bad news. I've rearranged my schedule so we can meet this morning. Have a seat and let's talk. Can I get you something to eat or drink? I asked. Nothing, thanks, I won't be here long, he said, crossing his legs. Steve, I like you, and it pains me to tell you that I am terminating my association with your firm. The 7 of us don't really like the direction your company is going, and we can't afford to be around if and when something happens. I don't understand, did we do something wrong? And if so, give us a chance to right the wrong, I pleaded with him. Steve, I've always liked you and you've never steered me down the wrong path, but your 2 partners are leading your firm down a shaky path. May I ask you a personal question? Of course, please go ahead, I replied. I didn't see you at the last few parties. May I ask why you weren't there? It's kind of a personal thing. You mean because your ex-wife is selling prostitutes to your new clients? Steve, one of them had the nerve to ask me if I wanted to go upstairs. Like I said, we don't like the direction your company is going and we're looking at other options. Think faster, my brain shouted loudly. How about I can guarantee you that in less than 30 days our company will turn 180 degrees? How about if I tell you that if that doesn't happen, I'll start my own firm? Look, it's only 30 days, and if I'm wrong, what do you have to lose? Give me a month to prove it to you. I could see the wheels turning in his head. Okay, 30 days and not a day more. In 30 days I'll be here again to either shake your hand or take my business. Agreed? Thank you, I can promise you won't be disappointed. I knew I had to fix this hellish situation, and fast. Andy and Ken showed up late, as usual. Guys, we have a huge problem. Some of our clients want to fold their business. One of them was molested by my ex-wife's hostesses at your last party. He was with his wife, for goodness sake. I told them we'll fix it, but we only have 30 days to do it. I need your help. What's that phrase? Deaf, dumb, blind, and stupid? That's exactly what they were. They liked the parties the way they were, and if a few old guys didn't like it, whatever. Look, Steve, we have contracts with all of them. They can't just up and leave without charging us a huge termination fee, and they're not going to do that. You worry too much, they told me. To hell with them, I thought. I'm not giving up without a fight. I picked up the phone. I made the appointment for lunch instead of dinner because I didn't want anyone to know about it. I'm glad you both were able to join me, I said to Ann and Linda. Why are you so secretive, Steve? Asked Dan. I, or SH. Would I say we have a big problem? I then recounted my meeting with Mr. Collins and my conversation with their husbands yesterday. If I have to, I'll leave on my own. I worked too hard to build this business to see it go down the tubes because of an ex-wife and a few prostitutes. What prostitutes? Said Ann, straightening in her seat. Haven't you been to any parties in the last 6 months? All those women handing out drinks and food are call girls hired by Heather. She told us they were former models, Linda added. Most likely former porn models. They take potential customers upstairs and give them a little incentive to sign. Our husbands would never go for it? They both insisted. Are you planning on going to the party on Saturday? I asked. Not really, they become more like frat parties than business meetings, and said, looking at Linda for agreement. Now a very personal question, when you both signed your prenups, were they the same as Heather's and mine? Steve, after we saw what Heather signed, we told our husbands that there was no way in hell we would sign such a document, and we didn't. I was stunned. You didn't sign anything? Just the marriage license, Linda said with a smile. My thoughts raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Can we meet Sunday at my house, say 10:30? Why? Asked Ann. I want to show you what really happens at these parties. I have a friend who will tape everything that happens. And we can watch it together. Steve, this is kind of embarrassing, isn't it? Said Ann, feeling a little awkward. Look, the point of the game is, do you trust your husbands? I just want to put an end to what I think is going on, that's all. Forgive me if I don't seem overly compassionate or concerned for Andy or Ken. This is about my earnings and, I assume, your earnings. I'm going to do this with or without your consent. I just want you both to know in advance. You can warn your husbands or leave it alone, it's your choice. Steve, you're not going to leave alone, are you? Asked Linda, looking more than concerned. I'd rather not, but if I have to, I'll do it. Why don't we postpone the trial until Sunday? Maybe after I talk to them they would have a change of heart, and if not, fine. None of us ate much at lunch. Since our company paid for the rooms, the hotel had no problem letting my man in early Saturday morning. I told him I wanted pictures and sound in the dining room and both guest rooms. John, when everyone leaves Saturday night, I want you to get all the cameras out and bring me the discs. I don't want any evidence left behind that might come back to haunt me, understand? At least now I could confirm what I had heard or prove my clients wrong, but I didn't think they were wrong. John brought everything just after 2 o'clock the next morning. The cameras, CDs, and microphones were all there. With a check for $700 in his pocket, he left, and I went to bed. I was going to look at one of the CDs, but I decided I'd better get a good night's sleep, because there was no telling what would happen next. Ann and Linda drove to my house together. They had a bag of donuts and coffee from Starbucks. I didn't seem to need to make breakfast. Have you watched the CD yet? Asked Ann, pouring herself a cup of coffee and grabbing a donut. No, but I already put it in the DVD player. Well, let's see what we've got, Linda muttered as she finished the last donut. It started out pretty damn simple. Maybe I was wrong, I told them both. Then I saw Heather look around and carelessly walk out of the room. I switched to another DVD to see her walk into one of the adjoining rooms, lock the door, and start undressing. She still looked good and I found myself getting aroused just watching her. I was feeling a little voyeuristic when the door opened and Ken walked in. Let's just say he didn't come in for drinks or food. No, please, no, and said as she watched him undress and lay down on the bed with her. When he said something about wanting her since his asshole partner had brought her to him, and I had seen enough. You could fry scrambled eggs on her forehead, that's how hot she was. At this point I was thanking my happy beginning that I wasn't him. We watched 4 or 5 customers being served. We fast-forwarded 90% of the action, and I figured Ken was the only asshole until Andy walked into one of the rooms with one of the women. He didn't make love to her, but he did play with her breasts. When Andy told her he wanted her to show his wife what to do, Linda threw her coffee at the TV screen. Steve, I'm so sorry. I wish I could hide it in my mouth right now, I'd show him what it feels like to be castrated hard, she said, standing up and strutting back and forth. At least he didn't swat me. Heather did 2 other men that night and both ladies said they never knew she was such a slut. And to think that we pitted her enough to make our husbands hire her to organize these parties, again, we're sorry about that, Steve. I'm sorry was a lot to take in. No problem, you didn't know, and to tell you the truth, I didn't know either. But now I do know. Unless you have a strong desire to watch any further, I'd like to turn this garbage off. I pressed the stop button. That bastard will be dead when I get home, and muttered. I don't even want to see mine, Linda yelled. I'm going to call and tell him to take his shit and get out. I let them go on for a few more minutes before I spoke up. Ladies, I said as the 2 angry women looked in my direction. Like it or not, we still need them. For what? Shouted back Ann. Their job. They are both very good at what they do when they are on the job. Right now, if the company is to survive, we're going to need their help. Both women sat down, but were far from calm. I have a suggestion for you both that will allow you to get back at your husbands and keep the company intact. I got their attention. For the next 2 hours I laid out my plan. They didn't like everything, but they agreed with most of my suggestions. I called our company's lawyer, and 3 hours later the agreement was signed, sealed, and notarized. Please don't freak out until the papers are filed with the court on Monday morning, I begged them. You'll have the upper hand by Tuesday, and I don't care what you do after that. And I really didn't care. My former best friends had screwed me, especially Ken, and they would get theirs one way or another. Monday was a typical Monday. We had a lot to catch up on. After the morning meeting, I went to my office, closed the door, and called my ex-wife. Heather, I need to meet you at the house tonight. The kids will be at my mom's, so no one will bother us. Steve, do you want me to wear something special? She said in her sexiest voice. No, wear whatever you want. You dog, I knew you couldn't stay away from me. I'll be there by 7, honey. I probably shouldn't have played along, but I just couldn't help myself. I wouldn't touch her with Ken's organ, I thought to myself, but I felt I had to warn her, because, if for no other reason, she was the mother of my 2 children but, thank God, no longer my wife. I left the front door open, and just before 7, she walked in wearing a long coat. When Heather opened it, she was completely naked. I figured this way we wouldn't have to waste time getting dressed, at least on my end, she said as she took off her coat. I held out a wine glass to her and clinked glasses. Here's to a once great marriage, I said, setting my glass down as a puzzled Heather looked at me. Please have a seat, because you're going to want to hear what I'm about to tell you. Steve, we can talk later. Right now we're going to need all of our energy to reconnect with each other, she started twisting her nipples. Did you say that to Ken too? And to 2 other guys from the party last Saturday, said I, turning on the DVD player. I fast-forwarded to the part where she and Ken were doing it and turned the volume up really high. Turn it off, please turn it off, she yelled through the tape. It was a stupid mistake. He told me that if I didn't sleep with him, he would turn me off, I had no choice. And the other 2 guys? To that she had no answer. The parties ended last Saturday. No more parties, no more debauchery, no more Ken and Andy. But they still owe me for Saturday. I pulled a wad of money out of my pocket. I think $300 a trick, that's enough for you and the other whores. I handed her the money. If I was a real asshole, I'd turn this tape over to the authorities, but you're still the mother of our children and I'm not taking them to jail to see you. Steve, I'm sorry, I needed money to live. I guess you'll have to find a way to do it off your back, unless you want to do it yourself, because I'm not paying you for it with my company's money anymore. God's wrath will fall on Andy and Ken tomorrow, and it won't be pretty. I suggest you get out of town for a couple weeks. Maybe you can visit your mother out of state until things settle down. I can't and won't forbid you from seeing your children, and I won't tell them what a whore you've become. That's between you and your conscience. However, until you reform, you can only see them in this house. You can't take them anywhere by yourself. And no overnight visits. Is that clear? I never had anyone when I invited the kids over. How stupid do you think I am? I just looked at her. I'm just sorry it ended this way. I thought we had a pretty good marriage, but apparently you wanted more than I was willing to give. For a minute I thought she was going to beg us again to try again, and if I hadn't seen the tape I might have considered it, but not now. Hell, there was no way I was going back to her, even if she was still making me horny. We talked, made plans for the future, and an hour a tear she was gone. She kissed me on the cheek and told me that if I ever needed stress relief, to call her. That didn't happen while I had two beautiful hands. And had divorced Ken, and Linda, for some reason, had decided to try to patch things up with Andy, although I wouldn't want to be in his shoes. You see, each of the ladies got 50% of their husband's shares in our company. With these shares, Linda and I now had a controlling interest in the company. Andy and Ken were told that they could keep their jobs, but that going forward they would only be paid for what they did for the company. They were not happy about this, but something about alimony payments and a possible impending divorce kept them working. We made the necessary changes to bring our company back to respectability, and although we lost a few accounts, we maintained a stable client base. Now it is just Linda and myself attending the monthly meetings. Next year we want to expand the attendance and add some new graphic designers, but that will be our decision. I see Heather every other week and have no idea what's going on in her life, nor do I care anymore. I get a lot of hits on my personality profile and have even dated a few of them. One girl caught my attention. Her name is Kikyo and she lives in Japan. She is a single mom and is planning a trip to the United States next month. We video chatted via computer and she seemed nice enough, but was concerned about what she had heard about Americans being disrespectful and asked me directly why my wife and I had separated. When I told her about it, she smiled and said she looked forward to seeing me again. Could she be the one? Only time will tell. But, as I said at the beginning, I like being in love and will remarry someday. I just hope she doesn't have trouble signing a prenup like Heather did. I'm not going to take any chances, and neither are and or Linda.